Hello there, this is Mitchell, the chess noob, learning and having fun with chess. Today I've got another game of the Vienna Game, and in this one the queen and her diagonal posse, the bishops, completely dominate the black king. Well, let's go take a look. So I've got the white pieces, of course, and the Vienna Game, so e4, e5, knight c3. Now the opponent defends with the Max Lange Defense, knight c6, that's great. Bishop comes out to its usual square, bishop c4. And here my opponent in 1200s plays an interesting move. I think they weren't entirely sure what to do, and so they played a delaying move, really, a6. So against this, let's continue with the general Vienna setup, which is, potentially getting the pawn to f4, knight behind the pawn, and to do that I need to have the bishop defending the f4 square. So pawn to d3 first. And now they play bishop to c5, which makes it almost like the full copycat variation, but with a difference because they've played a6 and I've played d3. But some of the same ideas from the full copycat variation still stands. With the bishop having to come out, you can immediately punish with queen to g4. So this is the giraffe-ish queen. So if the bishop came first, this would be the giraffe attack. So queen to d4, immediately attacking the g7 pawn. So what is black going to do? Well, black responds very, very typically against the copycat variation, which is queen to f6. Now, if you remember my recent game where I showed the tactics to use in the Nc3 gambit, the Nc3 gambit is knight d5 in this position, attacking the queen and also the c7 pawn. Now, in this setting, however, we can't do that because obviously what black is lining up is the queen and bishop attacking the f2 pawn in a scholar's mate-like position, and there is a real risk here. Now, there isn't a risk in the usual full copycat because the pawn on the d file hasn't moved forward. So if the queen captures a pawn, king slides to d1, and black thinks they have a mate, well, they actually just straight up hang their queen. However, that's no longer possible with the pawn now on d3. So that's a real threat, and so we need to address that first. So knight to f3, blocking off the f-file and also making, their queen a little bit misplaced, because now this is still a real threat that's coming. Black gets a little bit impatient here, brings the knight to h6, and this is not uncommonly seen because, the natural developing square for the knight is taken up. So they think, I really don't like the queen being there. Maybe there's some trap. So they bring the knight to the edge of the board, which is a mistake because the natural home for the queen in these positions is parked on g3. So g3, and this knight is actually just a bit silly now. It's not really doing anything useful. They now short castles kingside, and of course, we now have, a lot of potential attacks on that side. The knight now jumps forward. Knight attacks the queen, knight attacks the c7 pawn. What is black going to do? Now, a potential hidden thing, which might be a little bit obscure for the play with the black pieces, is that this bishop can take that knight. As long as that knight is not defended by the queen, this pawn, the g pawn, is pinned to the king. But they might have had a lapse of continuity, but they might not actually see that. So the queen, if it comes back here, that knight is toast. Now in this position, black may or may not have seen it, but they bring the queen to d6. d6. And I think their idea is they wanted to keep protecting that pawn. They wanted to keep an eye on the knight, and so that seems like a reasonable move. However, just like in the Deadpool game, we can take the pawn anyway. Knight captures the pawn on c7, because if they take, then they lose that knight. They did take, you can see that's a mistake. What black had to do was to counterattack my bishop, and now dark square bishop takes the knight, immediate checkmate threat. Black is in some serious trouble. So they're now forced to move the g-pawn forward, and of course now creating major weaknesses in the dark squares around the king. Push the h-pawn. So try to destabilize. They want to move. They moved the rook out of the way, seeing, that it was being attacked by the bishop. But you notice I didn't take it anyway. It doesn't really matter. I could sort of just trade in that material, but, I'm then basically just trading a very strong bishop for that rook, and their dark square bishop gets to come back for the defense. I didn't really want to do that. And you will see that the computer thinks that this is potentially the best move for black. And for a number of positions, this is a really important move for black, but it's a hard move to see, d5. So I push the pawn again, looking to destabilize. They bring the knight back, but it makes sense, but all it does is it cramps the space around the black king, and we're about to see some fireworks. You can see, once again, the best move was d5. Now here, I thought, probably a safe move is queen to this position and then sort of looking at mate like this. But, the problem, of course, is that black can potentially bring their queen back onto this file and, basically, potentially block that. So what I saw was something that Stockfish thinks was an inaccuracy, but it worked really well. Knight captures a pawn on e5. Now with a double attack on the f7 pawn. And more than that, it looks like that's going to be a fork, and I'll be winning the rook straight up. What did black do? They played a very human move, which was king to h8. But you can see once again, the best move was d5 to disconnect the bishop from the f7 square. Because now, look at this, I can get rid of that pawn, opening up the diagonal. The knight captures that pawn with check. You can see this dark square bishop covers those squares. King has only one square, forced to move back. Knight now jumps out of the way, discovered check. You can see the two bishops crisscross, covers all these squares. The knight now blocks the dark square diagonal so that the queens no longer look at each other. King forced to move one more time, and now queen e5, the last diagonal, checkmate. Good game, GG. My big takeaway from this game is to make judicious use of knight d5 and knight captures c7 as a tactical idea in the Vienna game. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.